as the dust settles, Naruto would exclaim his victory and request for Jiraiya to leave. Even though Jiraiya was at first dumbfounded at seeing the use of the 100 healings technique, he would regain his composure as he would see not only the markings, but the initial diamond on his chest near completely vanish, with Tsunade saying that Naruto should not have used it as soon, as now it's going to take a while to rebuild. Naruto would say he would go back to meditation as soon as Jiraiya had left, with Jiraiya finally speaking up, saying that he would be leaving as soon as they are prepared, as his Rasengan did land before Naruto's punch. The young Uzumaki would scoff, and this would start kind of a debate between the two, and would even result in both Tsunade and Shizune laughing, seeing the father-son-like, relationship that the two of them already hold. They would simultaneously turn to the group, asking them why they're laughing, with them settling down really quickly. Naruto would avert his attention over to Tsunade and ask her what they should do. Tsunade would once again burst out into laughter as she would say, "I guess we're going to the leaf." He would at first be a little against the idea, asking Tsunade if she really wanted to return, or if she had only felt obliged to hold up the bargain that he had made. She would once again let her laughter calm down, as she would say, at this point, she doesn't know why she wants to return, but she thinks it would be good for all of them to return to their place of birth. Naruto and Shizune would simply shrug and nod respectively, as they prepared to head back to Konoha. But in the world of Naruto, nothing is ever that simple. As the night would go by, Tsunade and Jiraiya would decide to go have a drink. And as they do, Tsunade would inevitably drink Jiraiya under the table, leaving him unconscious and her in a drunken stupor. As she is sitting there demanding more drink and the waiting staff denying her of it, a certain individual would enter the room. This individual being Orochimaru and his assistant Kabuto. She would at first threaten to kill him, as he is in the presence of his two prior teammates and Orochimaru making his original deal. He would make the deal to bring back her little brother and even her previous lover, with her being pretty shocked. Obviously, she would find this pretty hard to believe and would tell Orochimaru to leave before he dies. This is when Orochimaru would reveal practically what Jiraiya had been holding back. The fact that he had been the one to attack the leaf and even kill the third Hokage in attempts to get his grasp on a special individual. He does not make it too clear on that it's Sasuke, but that it is a child / genin within the leaf, so she has a rough estimate. But nevertheless, she would thwart Orochimaru's demands by telling him that nevertheless she still wants him to leave, as she'll never stoop as low as to working with him ever again. This is where he'd say that she has the chance to come back to him before they head out to Konoha, and he will be waiting on the hill in a certain building for around the next week. And this is where his plan sets into motion. He expects Tsunade to either take up his offer or attempt to kill him alone, meaning he can get rid of one of the primary threats to his livelihood, being Tsunade. That is, if she actually does take the bait. And as one might have guessed, Tsunade would actually end up taking the bait. Meaning that around the time morning comes around, she would ask Jiraiya if they could have one more drink before they left, where she would, as per usual, poison him, or at least give him a neurotoxin that would temporarily incapacitate him. And following on that, she would return to the hotel room where she would talk to Shizune and end up knocking her out. Naruto, who was on the other side of paper-thin walls, would be able to make out that Tsunade had actually ended up attacking Shizune, and in his mind knows that she had probably done it for a specific reason. So when she comes over to his room, he actually prepares as much as he can to prevent from getting knocked out, knowing that his master is about to do something stupid or drastic. So as she would come up to him and he would question what happened in Shizune's room, she would swing her hand to knock him on the back of the neck, or at least on the side, where he would at least attempt to pour as much chakra into shielding the location as he can, and would inevitably still be knocked out. But due to the chakra shielding, he is able to reduce a little bit of the damage and even the time of which he's knocked out, meaning that he wouldn't be incapacitated for as long as he would have initially, and would even be able to see Tsunade leaving the little town they were in, meaning he would attempt to wake up Shizune or even Jiraiya and continue to follow her, as neither of them would necessarily wake up. This is where we would see an initial bout between them, with her attempting to attack Orochimaru and Kabuto stepping in. They would at first have an initial fight where Kabuto would have to use the trick of slicing his hand open to reveal blood and at least set back Tsunade. This wouldn't be as effective as it had been initially, since Naruto was shortly behind. So after she gets thrown around for a bit by Kabuto, Naruto would be able to step in, nearly surprising Kabuto and even actually hitting him, as Kabuto would go flying and, to Naruto's assumption, probably break every bone in his body. He would pick up Tsunade as he would say to Orochimaru that Jiraiya is about to arrive. So if he doesn't want to fight both two legendary Sannin and two well-classed Jonin level fighters, obviously overestimating or at least mildly overestimating his own ability and that of Shizune's. So he would jump up onto a rooftop trying to help Tsunade regain her composure. Here he would put her down and scan over the area, as he would see a stumbling Jiraiya accompanied by Shizune making their way to where he currently is. So as he lays Tsunade down, he would jump back down to the area to prepare a fight with Orochimaru, since even though the Sannin did not have his arms, if he is bloodlusted towards Naruto, he doesn't have a high chance of surviving. But he doesn't need to survive a head-on confrontation, but only buy some time. So after him and Orochimaru would get into a bout of their own, Kabuto would eventually surprise Naruto, who had only been stalling up until this point, and would even land a appropriate hit behind his knee, which would temporarily disable his leg. Naruto would quickly realize what Kabuto had done and would attempt to stitch back the tendons using medical ninjutsu, but Kabuto would point out that it is completely useless, as the specific way he had severed it is not fixable through immediate medical ninjutsu and would actually take some time to heal naturally. Naruto, nevertheless, would not lose any of his composure, as he would go through some hand signs, biting the tip of his finger and summoning a small slug, which we know as Kitsuyu. The slug would proceed to crawl up into Naruto's clothing, as it would eventually appear on his shoulder. He would translate to the slug that he has to keep up with two high-level combatants, so he would need her to constantly heal the leg or any injuries he sustains throughout the combat to make sure that he is able to keep up. She would obviously have been already healing Naruto and would point out the tendon in his leg is properly severed, meaning she couldn't do much for that leg specifically. For Naruto to only point out that he doesn't need the tendon healed specifically, but only for her to keep the leg from practically ripping off. Kitsuyu, who had been summoned for similar purposes before, knows that Naruto plans on using his monstrous strength, or at least the monstrous strength and speed in his legs, to combat against these two opponents, meaning he would require her to constantly heal his leg to keep it from being dismembered, as he had mentioned. So she's not too up to the task, but nevertheless knows that Naruto is relying on her, so she would accept. Naruto, equipped with his knowledge of the human body and by extent his own body, along with his medical ninjutsu, would devise a stance more equate to using the full capability of his still remaining functional appendages, meaning he would shift his entire body to work more off of the movement of a single leg and both arms, meaning his current stance is going to be a lot more like one of Taekwondo. So he would be able to move a lot more freely and will primarily be attacking with his legs. So as he would leap off and clash with Orochimaru, a giant shockwave would be sent across the battlefield, with Kabuto even being moved by the residual shockwave. As Kabuto would prepare to lunge at Naruto, Naruto would simply swing, throwing Kabuto to the side, as he seems pretty useless in comparison. Obviously, Kabuto is a highly skilled combatant, but from what we've seen in the anime, he's never really dealt at this point with anyone with as high of a speed or strength stat as Naruto. Sure, he was able to fight with Tsunade, but she had the problem of blood, where Naruto doesn't. Meaning he is able to attack both Orochimaru, who is very limited, and Kabuto in a defensive way via offense. So, as time passes, inevitably, Jiraiya would arrive to attack Orochimaru, which would result in the face-off of the three summoning beasts, being Manda, Gamabunta, and of course Kitsuyu, with Naruto being the person who had actually summoned Kitsuyu in this case. But with the Battle of Summons most likely going exactly as canon, with only Naruto giving the commands to Kitsuyu, that leaves our not-so-favorite glassed bastard, Kabuto, to once again go after Tsunade. But this time Tsunade, even though not being able to exactly attack back, she has the protection of a Shizune who had gone on constant combative missions with Naruto, meaning that she would actually be able to stand up to Kabuto, who had initially landed a few blows on Tsunade. But Kabuto, being as cunning as he is, and his knowledge of offensive medical jutsu, would be able to seriously wound Shizune. But nevertheless, even though she had some serious injuries, would still stand up to protect her master, as seeing the will from Naruto to fight a Sannin, the least she could do is fight one's apprentice, since she does hold the same title, meaning she can't just embarrass Lady Tsunade by losing to Kabuto, meaning that she would give it her all to fight back. Seeing all of this would inspire Tsunade to overcome her fear of blood, and in this case Shizune's blood, which is all over her. She would push past Shizune and overcome her own fears, hitting Kabuto with a hit he will never forget, temporarily immobilizing him and having her join Naruto upon Kitsuyu, where the battle against Orochimaru would actually occur a lot different from canon, obviously lasting longer and Orochimaru taking a lot more damage, meaning directly after this battle he would have to take his new host, and not as in canon, where he would be able to push it along further, as his body had taken way too much damage. Meaning that now, after the battle and Orochimaru's disappearance once again, we see the group rejuvenate and actually head to Konoha. The group, now well rested after a few days had passed, would make their way to the gate of the hidden village, and would get there pretty uninterrupted, as most bandits and Ronin that see Jiraiya would immediately vacate. So, as they make their way to the Hidden Leaf, they would immediately be directed to the hospital. Obviously, Tsunade, Naruto, and even Shizune were expecting to be at first called to the Hokage's office to have a meeting with the council. At first, Naruto's departure from the village had not necessarily been discussed with them, meaning it would be a very important topic for them to go over, and the absence of a current Hokage would implore Tsunade's presence as well. But nevertheless, they were instead sent to the hospital, not only by Jiraiya, who had suggested they stop by there, but also some shinobi who had been at the gate to greet them. They would immediately make their way there to discover many casualties, not only casualties in the terms of death, but a lot of injured individuals, ranging from both shinobi to civilian, as the attack didn't discriminate, meaning they had a lot of work to do. At first, Naruto and Tsunade would be split between the generalized caretaking of civilians, but eventually one of them would be required to help a certain genin who had been in pretty unstable conditions. At this point, Naruto would take up the responsibility of looking at said genin. He would make his way to the hospital room where he would see the genin practically rip out the IVs and medical equipment from his body, demanding to be let out of the hospital. Naruto would enter the room telling the young boy to go lay down on the bed, sit down on the chair, or get knocked out. Obviously, the boy, who is raven-headed and even had a red hue to his eyes at the time, would deny Naruto's claims, saying that he will now be heading out of this junk place since it didn't help him up until now. So how would they be able to do it going forward? And as he does attempt to go forward, he would get thrown practically across the room by Naruto. Of course, he would be kinda pissed, but would nevertheless think to himself, how did I not realize his movements? My Sharingan was activated. I couldn't even see him throw me. What the hell was that? With him once again attempting to charge at Naruto, this time with actual hostile intent. He would throw a punch at Naruto, but would be easily grabbed, redirected, and even knocked out. So by the time he woke up, he would probably be very pissed. But by the time he did wake up, he would hear his medical examination. Naruto would be saying to a nurse that Sasuke's condition is unstable since there is a foreign chakra that seems to sprout from a seal on his neck, constantly entering and altering his body. And this type of seal is practically inoperable, and they would require Lord Jiraiya, who is luckily still in the village, to see if he could undo the seal. But before he could finish the examination, the boy would once again jump up, screaming at Naruto, telling him to go outside on the roof and have a proper fight with him. Naruto would simply put down his medical chart and sigh as he would motion towards the door. The raven-headed boy, excited for the fight, would quickly head towards the exit. This is where we'd see that Tsunade had actually been treating patients who had been in critical condition, meaning majority shinobi. But eventually she would be interrupted by a man in all green, who would practically be dragging doctors by his arms who were attempting to hold him back from interrupting Lady Tsunade, practically spewing out tears and exclaiming that his student had been really hurt. Tsunade would divide her attention between what she's currently doing and what Guy wants. She would of course implore that he calms down, and he would attempt to do his best, only sniffling while he explains. He would say that his student Lee had gotten injured before the attack, and they say that he'd never become a shinobi again. At this point, Tsunade would practically ask for Lee's medical chart and would even go over it, saying that Lee is probably better off never being a shinobi again, since even if the operation succeeds and he could walk once more, he would still never be in quite the proper condition to be a shinobi. Guy would cry knowing that his student could walk again and would know that he most likely can't live this life anymore, but nevertheless would beg of Lady Tsunade to personally oversee the operation. She would at first say that she is far too busy when Naruto would walk in. He'd say that with the chart that Tsunade had just went over and having verbally heard it, would say that Guy's student probably has a 50-50 chance of getting through the operation, with the failure not only being a failure, but probable death. This would of course shock the Jonin sensei, but Naruto would nevertheless exclaim that if it's a 50-50 chance, he's betting on Tsunade, so he'd make a deal. Obviously, Guy is still in tears, but Naruto would practically drag him, Tsunade, and even Shizune over to Lee's room where the operation would be explained. This is where Lee would question if he wants to go through with it and to say that he really wants to be a shinobi, so regardless of it costs his life, he will go through with the operation. Naruto would gain a big smile on his face and would even implore Lee to continue. He would tell Lee that if it's a 50-50 shot, always bet on Tsunade, since she's not the best gambler, but when bet on her, you will almost never lose, and would actually say that, in fact, if Lee ends up losing the ability to walk forever, he would slice his own back in an artery that would prevent him from walking either. Obviously, this would push up the motivation and at least overall morale in the room for everyone except Tsunade, of course. Shizune is ever the more confident in her sensei, but Tsunade would say that Naruto is stupid, with Naruto only exclaiming that his word is his word, and he'll never go back on it. So she better do her best to make sure Lee comes out of this on top. But with that out of the way, guys, this is going to be it for this part 3 of What If Tsunade Raised Naruto. I really do hope each and every one of you enjoyed this part and how we are about to align ourselves with the main Naruto timeline. Yes, I know we came in a little late for OG Naruto, but as y'all know, the Shippuden part will more than slap. And if you want to see the next parts of this series, make sure to Kage Bonshin that like button to increase the traction on this series, and hit that bell notification to be notified when it releases. So without further ado, I would like to thank every person you see on screen for helping by contributing to the channel financially and giving me some sort of gain while using YouTube as a creative outlet. If you want to see your name on screen, consider hitting the join button or going down to the link in the description that is titled members. So without further ado, this has been your boy Six. Peace.
1, 2, 3, let's go!
Subscribe for more.
Yada yada does it.